We welcome you to the ADHD Smarter Parenting Podcast. Here to heal and elevate lives is your parenting coach, Kimber Peterson.
Hello and welcome back to Smarter Parenting. Today we have Isaac. We're joined by a guest today, and Isaac is the co-founder and CEO of Joon, where he has focused on helping kids develop their superpower of ADHD and use it to their benefit. And so we're excited to hear a little bit more from him about his history, his experience, and some of the takeaways from his childhood. So Isaac, jump on in, introduce yourself to us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm Isaac, and as mentioned, I am a co-founder of an app called Joon that is really focused on helping ADHD kids. My background, a lot of it really came from my background. So I had grown up with ADHD. I had experienced seeing my parents struggle to manage it, especially. I think I was never interested in school. I was getting in trouble a lot. Most of my childhood was exploring the woods, dirt biking, skateboarding, playing video games, especially, and that was a big inspiration too with what we're doing now. But I remember playing a lot of video games that it was always a constant battle with my parents. And I can dive into this a bit more, but I think something interesting that came out of that was one of my first kind of personal explorations or curiosities that turned into something productive was, I think, really motivated or inspired from playing video games. But yeah, that's a bit of my background.
Yeah, that's great. I think as parents, we're always worried and want the best for our kids no matter what. But when you start incorporating a diagnosis that feels unfamiliar and potentially a little intimidating, it can start to feel a little bit scary, like you don't know what your child's future looks like. You know, you want them to have so many things and you want them to be motivated in so many directions. But ADHD is interesting in the way that it impacts things like executive functioning skills and, interests and attention span and those kinds of things. And sometimes we get lost in what we want our child to be doing instead and forget some of the great things that our child is accomplishing. It just might look a little bit different than our personal experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
So,
I think.
Go ahead.
I think that it's very tempting, and this is what my parents tried for a while. And I think it wasn't until high school that they started being more, probably later towards middle school, that they started being more hands off. But it was always trying to push me in different directions, and this is going to be a problem that any kid's going to have and any parent's going to have. But I think with somebody with ADHD, because of how that diagnosis affects kids, it's really hard to do things you're not interested in, and so it's even more of a cycle. And I think there's a power in what my parents ended up doing was giving me more freedom, which can be a bit risky and feel a bit scary, I'm sure. But that led to me exploring things that I was really interested in and gave me more freedom to discover things myself.
Yeah, that's great. So tell me more about the things that you discovered about yourself and the strengths that emerged from that.
Yeah. I mean, starting with the video game topic. So I was a heavy gamer as a kid. And that was always a battle especially with my dad. So we just had this computer. Back then it was, we had an office room with a computer on it, and I would always be trying to sneak into that room. And it was always this battle. My dad would lock the door, and then I would sneak through the window, and then kind of figured that out. So he would lock the window, and then found this way to have like a credit card and started kind of by the lock or something, and it would like keep the window kind of open so then we could like sneak in. And so it was always this worry that I was, not going outside enough or not focusing enough on school, playing video games. But that actually turned into, I think, something that became more productive. In about 7th grade, this interest in video games led to me discovering Minecraft, which I started becoming interested in starting my own server on Minecraft, which is kind of like you can build your own world and invite other players into it, but you can also kind of make a business out of it. And so you can sell things within your server. And so I was in 7th grade and I started just figuring out how to build my own server. I started getting into the technology behind it. There was this motivation just to like make some money off of it. And at the 7th grade, I think I ended up making, it was probably only like a few $100s to maybe like $1,000, but it was insanely exciting. And I think it kind of gave this motivation later in life that was something that I was really interested in. And it definitely came from exploring my interests early on in video games, which my father was super nervous about, but it translated into something that I think was more productive and more of that learning more about myself and my interests. developing the Minecraft server.
And that requires a pretty creative mindset, right? I mean, tell me more about that and kind of the thought process that goes into some of that work.
I've always had this kind of hypothesis, which maybe there's research. I haven't found. I found some research, connected to it. I think you see with ADHD people that they tend to, jump from conversation topic to topic really quickly. But I've always thought that kind of a superpower with ADHD is the I call it maybe associative thinking and connecting, like the connective thinking, which is really important for creativity, is connecting disparate ideas in ways that you wouldn't really imagine. And so, yeah, I definitely wasn't aware of that as a kid, and wasn't really aware that this was a creative thing I was doing. It was more like I was playing Minecraft and saw that other kids were not kids, they were probably just businesses and stuff, were making these servers and selling stuff to kids. And I was like, oh, maybe I could just maybe I could do that. And so I do think that there was a few, there was a connection with video games, but then having to build a system, having to build a server that will, solve this, or that, to actually make this server, it required this like technical understanding. And so learning that and then connecting that to how to, like, what can you sell to kids and what that looks like. And so it was a lot of different disparate connections in that sense, which I think is one of what I've personally seen in my friends with ADHD is that they all tend to be very strong in making those types of connections, which is a big part of creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up, your parents were worried about you. You knew that and acknowledged it, but you have come out of your childhood learning about your strengths and your weaknesses and being able to balance that. Were there challenges that you faced growing up with having ADHD, and how did you overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, I think that especially scariest for my parents is that ADHD. There's the low dopamine hypothesis, which is that you just tend to have a lower baseline dopamine. For me, I think that expressed itself in a couple different ways. One is that in order to get kind of the same satisfaction as other kids, I think I needed to do like more risk-taking behavior, which my mom definitely did not appreciate. I was always trying to race dirt bikes with my friend and do paintball, or like, and then like on the school side, it was skipping class and skateboarding and getting in trouble. And there was definitely a lot of risk taking, which really did make my parents, I think, afraid. Initially, my parents were very like controlling, and it didn't work. That part didn't work. Right, the controlling part, the like trying to lock me in, and like I would just I would sneak out. If a kid like wants to do something, they really want something, like you can't really stop them. And so I think that my parents started shifting the perspective after a few years of trial and error, and became more open to less restrictive and more kind of just allowing me to have some autonomy, which meant I was taking more risk, but then learning more. I think on my parents' side, I think opening up that, giving a bit more freedom, it's a balance. It was, in my mind, they were giving enough freedom that I could take risk and make mistakes, but not so much that I would mess up my life. I would get in so much trouble, or I would get so injured that that they would actually mess up my life in some way. And so they found this balance, and I think that started working really well. You need it. You need to have the freedom to explore it and to make those mistakes to really develop and grow as a person.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So tell us more about, some of the experiences that you had with your parents as you tried to navigate things like, schedule management and being able to make some of those choices on your own. Did you guys work through some of that problem solving together?
I think I don't think that we did too much in schedule management when I was a kid. I think like we had chores, we had some routines. I think I was never very interested in sticking to them or doing them, and there was a battle there, right? I think my dad tried, he would try bribing us with like allowances and stuff, but it didn't really matter too much. And so, I think like probably it would have been. I feel like my parents probably just gave up on it in some sense. Like it was just they tried for a while, and then that just wasn't taking. I think I still had some responsibilities, but it was very hands off, probably like less than would be recommended generally. And it definitely came from me just not sticking to it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting because fast forward to today, and you've told me that scheduling, your routine is an important part of how you've been successful. So where did that switch
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah, that was a thing. Like for me personally, I needed to come to like these conclusions myself, always, which is definitely like not strength. I feel like my dad, my parents, my mom, they were always telling me, they were always trying to get me on a structure, on a routine. They were always pushing me to try more in school or to be interested more in school and all these things. And that was at least one of my weaknesses, is that I needed to figure it out myself to actually believe it or to care about it, to have the interest in doing it. And so it was actually my senior year of high school when I did have this shift a bit. And so I had this mindset of not caring about school, not really knowing what I wanted to do. I was getting in trouble a lot, still just kind of having fun and exploring my own things. Then senior year of high school, I think I had this realization that, especially like my friends, I could see forward and see that I'm going to follow the same path as my friends where I am now. And it's not a path I'm interested in. Like, I don't want to be doing what I'm doing right now for the next few years. It's not really going to amount to much. And so I actually like made this internal decision to separate myself from my friend group. And I started doing martial arts my senior year of high school, but it was this intense thing where I would go every day for like 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours after school. It's called Muay Thai. It was like a Muay Thai academy, and I would go there for 3 to 4 hours every day after school. Initially, it was just do something that separates myself from my friends and kind of lets me focus. And I think that was like this first taste of like a real routine that I had, where it was every day after school, go and do Muay Thai, and that started building a lot of, I think, this initial spark of discipline and focus. And we've seen that in a lot of families. Interestingly, with like just martial arts in general with kids with ADHD seems to have a very positive impact on building that discipline, that creating that routine. But that was this first time where I started having a sense of a routine and realizing the importance. And now that's become like, I think once I saw that myself, that was a shift in my mindset. And fast forward to today, my routine, like you were mentioning, is very, it's very intense just to manage my ADHD while working on a company.
Especially a startup. Yeah, there's a lot of self-discipline that has to go into being an entrepreneur and managing that.
No, it is. In order to keep focused and productive, it sometimes feels like a battle, but then it starts feeling like you're working with it, right? Because there are so many strengths with ADHD that it's more like, how do we maximize those strengths, and building systems around that.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely complicated.
And I think you mentioned a really key point earlier. So I think so often we are battling with children to do things the way that we want them to do them. But the reality is they have to have a voice in that. And smarter parenting is based off of this evidence-based model called the teaching family model. And one of the core components of this is we talk about self-government. I was a foster parent, and I had a group of boys that I was a foster parent to, and several of them had ADHD. And in this, I remember there being this situation that came up. I don't even remember the exact situation. I just know that they were really struggling, like as a family, we were struggling with something. I think it was getting ready for school. So we started talking about, what needed to change and how things needed to improve. And this is already after I'd tried, 105 different things to make the morning go smoother. But the day that I sat down with them and I talked to them about what did they want the morning routine to look like, and they started pulling together the schedule, and they started to list off the consequences if we weren't to school on time, or different things came up. Their consequences were actually more intense than I would have done or I would have chosen. But in that situation, we had much more buy-in because they chose how the schedule went. I didn't find it to be the most smooth schedule, but when it came to implementing it, they were completely devoted to sticking to it because they were the ones that decided what that schedule looked like. So even though it wasn't, exactly the way that I would have done it, it accomplished what we needed. We got to school on time. It made a huge change for our family and how things were going in the mornings. And that concept of them needing to figure it out on their own is that same kind of thing that you were just talking about. There is this degree that you have to be able to be motivated and try things out and decide what you want things to look like, because without that component, there's not a lot of buy-in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a book called Drive, which talks about motivation, and
Yeah.
one of the three things is autonomy. And yeah, I mean that's a great example that you brought up. Yeah, I think it's such a simple switch, right? To change the dynamic where it's not you telling and directing somebody exactly what to do, but more like you're working together on it. And I think it's very common to see a kid as, as a kid, but if you remember what it's like to be a kid, when you're a kid, you don't feel like a kid in a way. You want to be an adult, and you feel like you feel a lot of the same things that you would feel as an adult, albeit worse executive functioning. And so it's a similar experience to be a kid, and if somebody's telling you everything to do, as it is as like to be an adult and have somebody telling you everything to do. Right? It's much different. You'll if it's in your job, you'll feel micromanaged and like you don't have any say and things like that. And that's exactly how I think kids, start feeling, especially as they get older and older and they start wanting that independence. It's definitely a balance, but it makes a huge difference to turn, I think, to turn that conversation around, just like you're saying, and give them kind of this autonomy or control within what they're doing versus just being told what to do. I like that a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've had a really great story, and I appreciate you sharing some of your background and some of the different things that you've experienced. And I hope more than anything that it gives parents some hope and just perspective, right? It's hard to know what the future holds for our kids, for any of our kids. And when parents are facing that and just really wanting the best for their kids, it can make parenting harder. As well intended as that is, it can make parenting harder. And I wish that we could have this crystal ball where we got to see our kids as they grew up and became adults and became successful. But I think you sharing some of your experience and your childhood and fast forward to today with your success, that it's really hopeful and motivating for parents to hear about, the positive, the superpowers that come from having ADHD and how you use that to your advantage. So if you were to leave parents with one thing today, what's one thing that they could take away?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just it. I mean, I think it's really leading into it being a superpower in many senses. Like I was saying, I know a lot of other startup founders and people that aren't in startups. I think ADHD people tend to make friends with other ADHD people, but they're all really successful, and a big part of that is how they think, and how they think is, they have ADHD, and that they're tied together. And that, yeah, I do think it's to be optimistic about it, and it can especially be rough in childhood, but there's a lot of hope, and it is often turned into a superpower. That would definitely be my one takeaway.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. So if you're interested in learning more about Isaac and his success and his app that he has worked on developing, where can we find that?
Yeah, it's the website would be the easiest. So it's JoonApp.io, and it's JOON app.io.
Okay. If you'd like to go look that up, this app gives you some skills with scheduling, right? It helps kids with ADHD to be able to be more successful with their routine and what they're working on. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's kind of like a to-do app for kids with ADHD. And so it's actually a game, but the only way to level up is by doing your routines in real life.
I love that. Really working to their strengths, because we know of that creative thinking and what motivates them. So instead of trying to battle them or just dangle a carrot of why they should be doing, the thing that they don't want to do, then really finding a way to be able to embrace that. And that really embodies some of your experience and what we've talked about today. So thank you so much for sharing. And I hope that people are able to find some of the benefit from that app and learn more about you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.